Good afternoon. I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, welcome to our 85th Nonprofit Empowerment webinar. This one is on holding COVID safe events, and Dr. Anita Kurian, who knows more about COVID and related issues than anybody else I know, is going to be our subject matter expert. But before we do that, let me welcome our learning community of volunteer and professional nonprofit leaders. It's a pleasure to bring back, he's been a guest on this show, Chris Martin, who's president of the United Way of San Antonio and Bexar County. I said I'm going to give you a whole 5 minutes, I think. I'm pretty generous today. And Chris is going to give you a quick update on what United Way is doing this fall. And he has 2 positions in the advancement arena to announce. Chris, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me on the webinar this afternoon. And good afternoon, everybody. And I promise you, in fact, Jim, you gave me 5, and I'm going to take 4. How's that?
Okay. And our Dr. Kurian will get 1 more minute. Thank you.
I'm gonna over deliver for you, but welcome again, everybody, and thank you for having me, Jim. And just a very quick update on some of the things that are happening with United Way. Certainly, as many would see and can imagine, we're really getting into the heat of our annual campaign here in San Antonio and Bexar County. So a lot of activity around that, and I will tell you. Since the topic today is about COVID events, what I will tell you is we're starting to, what we're experiencing, at least in our annual campaign, is we're starting to see what I would term a much more normal feel. Kind of
I bet that's something to celebrate.
Absolutely, a little bit of a pre-COVID feel, and a real excitement by many of our partners, or our corporate partners, to bring their people together around a common cause for the community. So really feel good about that, feel like that will help lead to some strong results as we're thinking about this year's campaign. Certainly looking to try and drive growth in the campaign, and have done that, trying to do that in a number of ways, certainly with the workplace campaigns, but also outside of the workplace and engaging people in different ways. So right. A lot happening there. And then I would also tell you, we're in the middle of one of the things, unfortunately, when the tragedy of Uvalde hit. One of the things that we did was we launched a fund that will focus on the mental health needs of that community as we go forward. And we're very clear in saying that we wanted to focus on long-term mental health needs for the community. So we're in the middle of, we're readying to approve our first round of investments to the tune of about $600,000 for mental health in Uvalde, for the residents of Uvalde, and then we will distribute the final $1 million.
Hey,
thank you.
And you have 2 jobs to announce. John, if you could put the slide on the screen.
Yep, two positions we have open, and the first I would share with you is the development manager of our giving societies. So we've gained a lot of traction in our Tocqueville Society, which is our $10,000 plus donors. And then we have several societies that are just below that $10,000 plus donor society. And this position will support those just below. And it really is, how do we build a pipeline for the future, but also support those groups of people to the tune of, a couple thousand strong in terms of numbers. And so how do we engage those folks? And it plays right into our strategic plan. In one of the things we're trying to accomplish is finding a way to create great individual experiences for donors. And
by the way, Chris, and people can apply online at that web address. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Both positions are still open, right?
That is correct. And the second position is our Vice President of Development, and that's for corporate relations. So think about that in the context of our annual campaign, a lot of the workplace campaigns, and having the staff that support those campaigns reporting to this position. So a big chunk of our organization from a development standpoint reports to this position. And going forward, it's also not only supporting what we currently do, but how do we think differently about that? How do we engage differently, and how do we support corporate partnerships in a very different way? So those are 2 open positions. We'd love to have people apply. Would love to talk with people if there's an interest, and happy to talk further if anybody has questions as well. So feel free to reach out.
According to my stopwatch, you made 4 minutes on the dot. Chris, express our appreciation to you and the entire United Way team for everything you do to make San Antonio a better place to live. Thank you for the leadership and the service and commitment to the community.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Anita Kurian. I'm going to keep her introduction. She has a 17-page CV. I'm going to reduce it to about 2 lines. She's the assistant director at the San Antonio Metropolitan Health District, and more appropriately, she leads the activities of the Communicable Diseases Division. And for the last 2 years, she's been with the city of San Antonio. So I know you have been very, very busy. And thank you for your service and leadership for keeping the people of San Antonio, keeping us safe. Thank you for your leadership. I have several questions ready for you, and we'll also take questions or comments from the audience. First of all, thank God, we're in a much stronger position than we were a year and especially 2 years ago. But that doesn't mean the virus has gone away. Could you give us a brief status report on where we stand? And most importantly, what do we continue to be careful about? What do we need to continue to be careful about?
So Jim, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. So as far as the COVID-19 status goes, this virus remains widespread nationally and here in our community as well, which is Bay County. But as you already mentioned, the cases are going down, right? So we are seeing new case trends going down, death trends going down, hospitalization trends going down. So they've all been declining for several weeks now. And I personally attribute this decline that we are seeing in terms of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths to great strides we've made in testing, vaccines, and treatment fronts, right? So we have increased the population immunity by vaccination as well as through natural infection. But like you mentioned, make no mistake, even though the cases are going down, this pandemic is not over yet.
Yeah.
And this will not be over for at least the foreseeable future, right? So the virus will continue to circulate, but it has certainly become less disruptive, right? Because of all those advances that I've mentioned. We have effective vaccines, we have better therapeutics than where we were way back in the 2020s. So we continue to recommend staying vigilant, getting tested if you have symptoms consistent with COVID-19, staying up to date with your vaccines, very important. And like I mentioned, we have vaccines available for anybody 6 months and older, and everyone 5 years and older are encouraged to get booster shots as well.
Hey, Dr. Kurian, what is a compromised immune system? Who typically has it? And what extra safeguards should you take if you have a compromised immune system?
So, I always say, think about your immune system as a strong army, right? And this army's mission, meaning your immune system's mission, is to protect you from enemies from outside, right? Like the viruses, bacteria, or domestic, which is your autoimmune disorders like lupus or cancer. But when you're immunocompromised, what happens is this army is weak, right? Your immune system's defenses are low, and it affects your ability to fight off infections and diseases, right? So one could be immunocompromised through various mechanisms, right? Sometimes if you have medical conditions like your chronic diseases, like diabetes or chronic heart disease, chronic lung disease, you can be immunocompromised, right? Sometimes if you're on some treatment, like folks on cancer treatment, right? Chemo or radiation, folks on long-term steroid treatments, those folks can also have weakened immune system. Folks who've had organ transplants, right? Bone marrow transplants, they can have weakened immune system. And then of course, the very young and the very old as well, right? So the very young, the babies, their immune systems are not matured enough. And that is why it's not strong enough to fight off infections in the very young. And the very old, with increasing age, right? Especially if you're 65 and older, just like with everything else, things start breaking down, including your immune system's ability to respond to an infection or an infectious disease threat, right? So these are some of the reasons why somebody might be immunocompromised. Again,
and if you fall in one of those categories, what extra safeguards and precautions should you take?
So we say, like I mentioned for COVID, since we're talking about COVID-19, COVID is not over yet, right? But it's not just for COVID, but any other infectious diseases. You should avoid coming in contact with sick persons because you are more susceptible to getting infections from these sick person. Make sure you're up to date with vaccines. This is the theme you'll hear me say over and over again. Make sure you're up to date with vaccines and make sure you mask up, especially even though mask mandates are off across the nation, mask up, especially when you're indoors. The more layers of prevention strategy one adopts, the better chance you have in fighting this infection.
Hey, Dr. Kurian, let's move back to the very basics. How is this virus actually transmitted and what are the symptoms?
So this is transmitted primarily when an infected person breathes out droplets or very small particles that contain the virus, right? And these droplets or particles are then breathed in by other people who are standing very close to this infected person. Or these particles with the viruses can also land on eyes, nose, mouth, especially through flashes or sprays through cough and sneeze by the infected person. So primarily, it is spread through respiratory droplets. In some circumstances, it can also spread through surfaces that are contaminated by infected person, right? And I believe, Jim, the second part you were asking about
was about the symptoms.
Symptoms are pretty similar to your flu-like illnesses, right? You can get these symptoms within anywhere from 2 to 14 days after you've been exposed to the virus. And most common symptoms include fever or chills, cough, shortness of breath, fatigue, generalized body ache, headache. Some folks have also mentioned loss of smell and loss of taste, which may not come back even after you recover for quite some time. Sore throat, stuffiness of the nose, and in few rare instances, we've also seen gastrointestinal symptoms like nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. But the most common symptoms are your flu-like symptoms, right? Headache, fever, sore throat, nasal congestion, and things like that.
Okay, if you exhibit such symptoms, what precisely should you do?
If you exhibit these symptoms, get tested. Get tested either by going to your doctor's office or use a home test kits. Everybody now it's widely available, easily accessible. Get tested and isolate yourself until your test results. You get your test results back. Now, if you test positive for COVID-19, we say regardless of your vaccination status, you should isolate from others, right? So you should stay home for at least 5 days, isolate from other household members as well. Within your same household, you're likely to be most infectious during those first 5 days. And that is why we say absolutely isolate yourself during that first 5 days of symptoms. Wear a high quality mask if you must be around somebody in your home, especially in those common areas like your family room or dens, kitchens, things like that. You can end your isolation after 5 days if your symptoms are improving. And very important, you're fever free for 24 hours without taking any fever reducing medication. But I want to emphasize that until at least that day 11, you should make sure you are keeping a safe distance from others.
Dr. Kurian, what are the current variants that are out there and what do we know about them?
So the predominantly circulating variant at this time here, not just across the nation, but here in our community as well, is the Omicron subvariant, which is your BA.5. So approximately 88% of the circulating variant is this Omicron subvariant .5. There are other Omicron subvariant, which is BA.4. And this BA.4 and BA.5 combined make up about 97% of the variants that are circulating at this time in our community, which is Bay County, as well as across the nation. Now, these variants, I want to mention that these are easily transmissible and they're immune evasive, meaning if you've been vaccinated previously, you are still at risk of getting this infection because these variants are slightly different from that original strain of COVID-19. But the good news is that the recently authorized the bivalent booster shots, they can help restore protection that has waned since the previous vaccination and provide broader protection against the newer variants, these Omicron subvariants, A.4 and A.5 that are predominantly circulating in our community.
A lot of our nonprofit friends are going to be holding large gatherings, most likely indoor this fall. And you have emphasized the importance of having a well-ventilated facility. Could you talk a little more about that and its importance?
And I want to say all these recommendations, they are good for any infectious disease, not just COVID, any infectious diseases that can spread through respiratory mode, right? So a well-ventilated indoor facility should have lower concentration of indoor air pollutants. And you can achieve this by increasing the amount of outdoor air coming in indoors, right? So essentially a well-ventilated indoor facility should have a good airflow system. And you can do this by opening windows and doors if that is possible, and if weather permits too, or having ceiling fans running, having the air conditions running with vent controls open. So just make sure that the room that you hold events in is not stuffy, smelly, or muggy.
Dr. Kurian, if our audience is hosting an event that has attendees who fly in from other cities of the country, maybe from other parts of the world, should they take any extra precautions?
So the short answer is no, right? So we did have several different precautions depending upon where the person lived. But at this time, since the virus is widespread globally, there are no additional protocols that are in place for visitors, right? So the public health recommendation is the same for everybody. Stay home if you're sick. Get tested if you have symptoms that are consistent with COVID-19. And most important, stay up to date with your COVID-19 vaccines.
Dr. Kurian, let's go back to something really basic. What is a well-fitting mask?
A well-fitting mask should go over your nose, your mouth. It should fit snugly against the sides of your face, and they should not have any gaps, right? And I always say this, no matter what type of mask you use or you choose to wear a mask that fits you well, right? Goes over your nose, mouth, snugly by the side, and it's comfortable, right? So the best mask is the mask that fits you well, and it's comfortable for you to wear.
Now, you're recommending if a nonprofit's going to have a very large event, if there's a feasible way to do it outdoors, that's always better. If you can amplify on that, and also if you're holding, say, 500 people outdoors, are there any protocols to follow?
So we are not recommending any additional precautions for an outdoor event at this time, or for that matter, even indoors. The recommendation is still the same. Ask your guests to stay home if they are sick. Make sure everybody practices good hand hygiene, right? This is regardless of COVID. Practice good hand hygiene and good cough etiquette. By cough etiquette, I mean when you're coughing, either cover your cough with a tissue, not your hands, not the palm of your hands. Cover your cough with a tissue and dispose the tissue off in a trash can, or cough into your sleeves, right? And I know folks have a lot of questions on masks outdoors too. You know, like I said, the risk of COVID transmission outdoors is low to minimal. So you may choose to wear a mask, and you'll hear me say this over and over again, choose to wear a mask based on your personal preference. informed by your personal level of risk. But having said that, people with symptoms who have tested positive should wear a mask and should stay away from the events.
A lot of nonprofit events feature the service of food and beverages. Are there any related protocols to take if you're serving food and beverages?
Just make sure that you have all the food safety protocols in place, right? So the food is prepared and stored at the proper temperatures. If you're using a buffet line, it's always, and I say this all the time, just because I see a lot of inappropriate behavior while handling food, right? So if you're using buffet lines, it's always a good idea to have servers instead of attendees serving themselves. Avoid bare hand contact with ready to serve food and food surfaces contacts if possible, and if feasible, use disposable gloves. Always use tongs. Like I said, use your hands to touch the ready to eat food, and other tools to handle food. But most important is make sure the food is prepared and stored at the right temperature.
Right. If I purchase a ticket or a table to an event, and all of a sudden I practice symptoms, I imagine you would tell or recommend that I not come to the event. And you're suggesting that nonprofits consider a liberal refund system that maybe advances a credit for next year, but you don't want people who aren't feeling well to come to your event with hundreds of people. Could you amplify on that?
Yes, that's correct. Absolutely correct, Jim. Whether to refund or extend that that ticket to the next year events, that is not a public health decision, right? That's a decision that each one of you have to make on your own. But from the public health perspective, you said it. It makes more sense to ensure that one does not attend events to save money when one is not feeling well, right? So perhaps let them carry it forwards or to the next year. Again, that's not a public health decision or a recommendation that I can make.
Let's get back to some more basics. How often should we receive a booster shot?
So people 5 years and older are eligible to receive a booster at this time. And the number of boosters, it's different or the type of booster you receive is different depending upon which age group you fall under, right? So for people 5 years to 11 years at this time, they're currently recommended that original booster shot, the monovalent booster shot. People 12 years and older are recommended to get that bivalent booster shot, which has been recently authorized. So it's one booster, one dose of updated vaccine or one dose of booster at this time, unless you are severely or moderately immunocompromised. Then there may be additional doses of booster that you may need. But if you're healthy, immunocompetent person, you are recommended that one dose of booster.
Hey, if someone has caught the virus before, does that increase, decrease, or have no impact on the possibility of catching the virus again?
So the viruses in general, that is their innate quality, right? So viruses in general, they mutate all the time, meaning they change their composition, their structure all the time. So it is possible for a person to become infected again. While most changes do not affect how the viruses behave, meaning most of the mutations or the changes that the virus go through may not affect how the virus behaves. But every time a virus makes a copy of itself or multiplies, it has a potential of producing a variant virus that may spread more easily, more severe disease, right? So you may get infected if you have been previously infected because of these new variants that are emerging. So the best way to stop these new variants from emerging is to stop the virus from spreading within our community. And this can be done again I know I'm going to sound like a broken record. You can prevent the viruses from mutating or circulating any further by making sure that majority of us, if not all majority of us, are vaccinated and up to date with the vaccines.
Dr. Kurian, since the CDC has removed the requirement of social distancing, what are your recommendations to our nonprofit friends on spacing if they're holding a large indoor event?
So at this time, there is no recommendation to spacing. You rightly said CDC has de-emphasized distancing measures, right? So CDC is no longer recommending that folks be placed 6 feet apart, right? So I would say whatever feels folks comfortable. You certainly don't want to be packed in a sardines, right? So you should make sure they have place to sit, enough elbow space, and that will be a comfortable event to attend.
Hey, what do we know about the new public health challenge called Monkeypox? How is it similar to COVID, and how is it different?
So monkeypox, it's a rare but potentially serious disease. Again, it's caused by a virus, and this virus belongs to the family of viruses that cause the smallpox. So I always say it's the same family as the smallpox virus, but it's a cousin of the chickenpox virus, right? But unlike COVID-19, this is not a novel virus or a novel infection, meaning this is not a new virus or a new infection. This monkeypox virus has been around since the late 1950s, with human cases since the 1970s. So this is not something new. We've known about this disease. What's new with this outbreak is that we are now seeing human cases in locations or countries that previously did not report human cases of monkeypox, right? Monkeypox typically was endemic prior to 2022. It was endemic in West and Central Africa, but now we are seeing it emerging and causing disease in locations that previously were not documented to be monkeypox endemic regions, right? So as of this morning, we have slightly over 59,000 cases from 102 countries, and 95 of these countries, again, I want to stress this, 95 of these countries have historically not reported a human case of monkeypox prior to 2022, right? So it's not a new infection. We are seeing it in new places. Now, unlike COVID-19, monkeypox is something that does not spread easily or casually, but it is spread through close personal, often skin-to-skin contact. So you cannot get monkeypox by walking by somebody in the grocery store, or rubbing against somebody at the airport, or sitting next to your coworker at work, right? So it doesn't spread that easily. And the risk of this monkeypox to the general population, in contrast to COVID-19, it's pretty low. And that is why you don't see public health making a recommendation of broad general population vaccination like COVID-19, right? So most of these monkeypox transmissions at this time, we are seeing it occurring through sexual transmission in the same population who experience highest risk for HIV and STDs. So the vaccine at this time, and yes, I forgot to mention this, there is an FDA-approved vaccine against monkeypox. Remember, it's not a new infection, right? We've known about monkeypox cases since the 1970s. So there is an FDA-approved monkeypox vaccine. But at this time, like I mentioned, it is being recommended for those close sexual or household contacts of cases of monkeypox, only because it does not spread easily in the general population.
Thank you. If you attend a large indoor event, how often should you wash your hands?
Yes, as often as you can, but at least make sure that you wash hands before and after preparing food, before and after eating, absolutely. Very important to practice good hand hygiene after using restrooms. We see a lot of diarrheal illnesses happening primarily because folks forget to wash their hands, right?
Mm.
So after using restrooms, it is a must. It's not recommended. I say you ought to wash your hands after using restrooms. Moms out there, especially if you're changing diapers or cleaning up a child who's used the toilet, make sure you wash your hands and make sure the child's hands are clean as well. And again, after blowing your nose or coughing or sneezing into your eyes, into your arms or into your palms, make sure you wash your hands. And I would say,
Is using hand sanitizer
yeah.
as effective as washing your hands?
So washing your hands with soap and water is gold standard, right? So running hands with under the running water for 20 seconds, wash your hands with soap and water, that's ideal. But some of these events, that's not practical. So the next best thing is to use alcohol-based hand sanitizer and make sure the alcohol content is at least 60% and over. And that's
Mhm.
care of 99% of the germs, these
Mhm.
often germs.
Mhm. Okay, you attend a large event. You're going to see some people you maybe haven't seen in 2 years. Okay, what is acceptable physical contact? Can you bump elbows, bump fists? What do you recommend if you go to a large indoor event as far as physical contact?
So at this time in the pandemic, or at this point in time in the pandemic, there are no public health recommendations. Remember, I mentioned earlier, CDC has de-emphasized social distancing, right? So there are no recommendations, public health recommendations, with regards to how you greet. I say do what individuals are most comfortable with. Some folks are comfortable shaking hands, some folks are huggers, some folks still want to maintain that 6 feet distance. And I say, yeah, you know yourself best and you know what's most comfortable for you. And make sure we respect that.
You're doing a great job of managing time, Dr. Kurian. We're way ahead of schedule. John, do we have any comments or questions from the audience at this time?
Not at this time, Jim.
Okay. What's a reasonable timeline if a nonprofit is hosting a large event for cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting all the surfaces that might be touched during the event? How can a nonprofit prepare for that?
So we typically, and we get a lot of these questions. So typically we say you clean before the event and after the event, right? But that is more realistic, cleaning before and after the event versus during the event. Now you certainly can clean during the event when something gets soiled or spilled, but absolutely you should clean before and after. And like I mentioned earlier, practicing good hand hygiene is critical, is of paramount importance. So you should have hand sanitizers available or in the room, or if you're serving food, certainly by the buffet table.
Dr. Kurian, we're going to share your contact information at the close of the webinar, but we do have some attendees from Dallas, from Houston, from other parts of the country. Where can people turn to get expertise like you're offering right now?
You absolutely can turn to your local public health department. So I work for the local public health department in Bexar County. So if you have folks outside of Bexar County, please make sure you reach out to your health department to know what their recommendations are for their jurisdiction, because some of the recommendations may be different based on where you reside, right? So all those recommendations that I've been giving out are good, are in accordance with the CDC guidance, and are good for the Bexar County. If you happen to live in Austin, Travis, or Dallas, Fort Worth, check with your local public health department. They are your best and trusted source of information. Now, other resources, Texas Department of State Health Services, which is the state public health department, and of course the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. They are all good resources, but I would say start with your local public health department, because everything happens locally and ends locally, and your local public health department has the best data available to make informed decisions.
Okay. Hey, can we assume that the worst is over and let up on our protocols and safeguards?
Oh, let me bring out my crystal ball. I don't want to suggest that I have a crystal ball, but it's important for us to realize that we are entering a new phase of this pandemic, right? So we are at a different stage, certainly at a different place from 2020, early 2020s. But it's too early to say this pandemic is in our rearview mirror or we are done with this pandemic, right? With advances in vaccines, improving vaccine coverage here in Dare County, about 77% of us are fully vaccinated, right? So we have pretty good vaccination coverage here in our jurisdiction with advances in therapeutics, right? We have learned to live with COVID-19. This virus is not as disruptive as it was way back, say, a year ago for us, right? So we don't have, I don't foresee a shutdown here, at least here in Dare County, in my jurisdiction. We don't have any mask restrictions. We don't have mask mandates here in the state of Texas. And CDC has also de-emphasized social distancing, right? So life is getting back to normal, but we are certainly not done with this virus because this virus is still circulating here in our community, statewide, and certainly nationwide. So
Yeah.
we need to remain.
Hey, picking up on the question and your crystal ball, do you foresee a time in the future when we won't have to worry about COVID at all? And when would that be?
I do see COVID as something that we'll have to live with, right? It's we'll have to learn to live with. I don't foresee a future where we'll no longer see a case of COVID. We'll learn to live with it. It'll become endemic. And the hope is that people will continue to get sick from this virus, but they won't be sick enough to die from it, only because we have better therapeutics now. It won't be as disruptive as it was a year or 2 years ago, right? And again, keep in mind, we have hundreds, if not thousands of different types of viruses that infect us. And we have been living with viruses, bacteria, parasites for centuries, right? So different ones cause different levels of sickness. Take flu, for instance. This is flu season. And by the way, if you have not vaccinated, please get your flu vaccines. Flu, when you get flu, you feel pretty terrible. You feel like you've been hit by a bus and for almost a week, right? And then on the other spectrum, you also have viruses like, let's take West Nile virus, right? 80% of us, when we get infected with West Nile, we don't even know we have been infected. So these viruses are unnoticeable. So you have two spectrums. So feel very terrible with one viral infection, don't even know you have a viral infection with another one. So I see COVID landing somewhere in middle. It may not be something you don't notice, but our immune system will learn about this virus over time, and we will learn to keep living with this virus. I don't think we can say we'll completely eradicate or eliminate COVID-19 from our lives.
Hey, John, if we don't have any audience Q&A, can you put up Dr. Kurian's contact information?
I sure can.
And I imagine we don't have any Q&A. So let's put up, if people are invited, if you're going to plan an event, this is Dr. Kurian's office phone number or an email, and they can contact her. Dr. Kurian, not only thank you for being a fountain of wisdom and good insights for today's webinar, but you've been a busy person and your team over the last 2 years. And I personally want to thank you on behalf of the people of San Antonio for the wisdom and the guidance and keeping us safe. Thank you so much for the leadership and the guidance you have provided our community.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Absolutely. And I look forward to, don't hesitate to reach out should you have any questions, concerns once this session ends as well. Thank you.
And I want to thank our learning community of professional and nonprofit leaders. We appreciate what you do to touch, improve, and save more lives. We'll be back 2 weeks from now on September 28th. It's going to be a conversation with philanthropist GP Singh, who will be joined by his son, Simran, who's the author of the best-selling book, The Light We Give, How Seek Wisdom Can Transform Your Life. So that'll be 2 weeks from now. And I want to thank, again, Dr. Kurian. You have been on the front lines of keeping us safe. We appreciate your wisdom, your leadership, your guidance, and you save lives. What can I say? You save lives. Thank you. And I want to thank our audience for your roles in your different nonprofits that improve the lives of others. And we'll see you 2 weeks from now, okay? Oh, let me mention too, what we're going to do is put a short summary on LinkedIn and Facebook that Dr. Curry and I have developed. And then John Largen's going to do a special spin cycle of this recording. And we're going to post it, John, tomorrow morning. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so everybody, thank you for joining us. Thank you again to Dr. Anita Kurian, and be well. We'll see you 2 weeks from now.